Hello there, I'm Lord Thranis, and welcome back to our ongoing adventure in exploring the world of the Elder Scrolls. Today we're finally going to be moving on from the metaphysical aspects of the Orbis' lore and looking at the real world, quote-unquote, that the Elder Scrolls takes place in. We'll be examining the very different continents that make up Nirn, and the stories of the wide and varied inhabitants within. So, as always, please join me as we turn the pages of the Mysterium Xarxes once more. The world of Nirn is a lot bigger than you might think at first glance at your basic Elder Scrolls game. As expansive and varied as Tamriel is, it's easy to forget sometimes that it's just the largest continent on a whole planet of magic and mystery. The combined worlds of Nirn have wide arrays of peoples, climes and civilizations. On screen at the moment you'll be seeing a map of Nirn. It's a fantastic piece of work by the artist Khavir. However, as gorgeous as this art is, it's important to be aware that we don't actually have any form of official geography of Nirn. We have a general knowledge of the shape of many of the continents, and a good idea of where they sit on a map in relation to Tamriel. We get that from in-game books and a few outside sources. We haven't ever had an official map of Nirn published by Bethesda though, so take any visuals here with a bit of a pinch of salt. However, every one of these continents is a known entity in the world of Nirn with their own peoples and history. So let's go round the clock, shall we? We'll start at 12 with Atmora. The crux of Atmora can be defined with a single adjective. It's cold. And not just cold weather and snow, we're talking ice-covered, ever-snowing, go outside without at least 3 layers on, you're going to die cold. Atmora is the Arctic north of Nirn, and its inhospitable climate is so freezing that the dead of Atmora barely decompose. It's a hard, unforgiving land, and it produces hard, unforgiving men. The Needs, ancestors of all human races on Tamriel. The Needs came to Tamriel in waves, colonising the similarly cold and icy northern shores of the land. Eventually that would become the province of Skyrim, where their Nordic descendants still share many elements of Nordic culture. The most famous son of Atmora is likely Ysgramor, who responded to the decimation of his first colonisation attempt by returning with his legendary 500 companions, driving the indigenous elves out of Skyrim and establishing himself as the first human to rule in part of Tamriel. Next we turn our eyes to the east and come to the land of Khavir, probably the most fleshed out of Tamriel's sister landmasses, and certainly the one which has the most active interactions with her people. Khavir is a land of 4 different races. Some have much more detail than others. The first of these races is the Kamal, snow demons who spend winter frozen solid, but thaw in the spring to attack their eternal enemies the Tung Mo. The Kamal actually attempted to invade Tamriel in the Second Era. They successfully sacked the Nordic city of Windhelm before they were brought down in a climactic battle by the combined forces of the Nords, the Dunmer, and unexpected aid from Argonians. This is actually the event that leads to the formation of Elder Scrolls Online's Ebonheart Pact. The Tang Mo are a race of monkey-like people. They're renowned for being kind and generous to all. Much like the Khajiit of elsewhere, there are various different breeds of Tang Mo, all with their own characteristics, and they lead comparatively simple lives when compared to their equals across Nirn. Simple though doesn't mean weak. Every race on Khavir has tried to enslave the Tang Mo at some point or another in their history, but they've always been beaten back by the strength and solidity of the armies of the Monkey Men. In recent times, the Tang Mo have allied themselves with the third of Khavir's great races, the Kapotun, a race of tiger folk of unknown relation to the Khajiit. The Kapotun are ruled by a being named Tosh Raka, who lends the Ka to his subjects' nomenclature. Tosh Raka is supposedly the first of the Potun to succeed in actually becoming a dragon. Whether that's a metaphor or literal isn't completely confirmed, but various sources in the game do suggest that this was a physical transformation, with Tosh Raka taking the form of a dragon but the colouring of a tiger. The Carpotun are also the great enemies of the fourth and final race of Khavir, who are last but by no means least. Now before I get into describing them, I do need to make a quick note here. I've got absolutely no idea what the quote-unquote official pronunciation for the name of this race is. I've put the spelling up on the screen, but as you can see, that's not exactly a great guide to how you might say that name. The unofficial Elder Scrolls pages, the UESP, from which I derive a lot of the information for these videos, makes note that they're pronounced by some as the Saesi. For my part though, I prefer them to call them the Saishi. The Saishi are by far the race that have had the most contact with the people of Tamriel. When an in-game source refers to something Khaviri, 90% of the time they're talking about the Saishi. Snake-like in appearance, but not expanded upon any more than that really, the remnants of the first Saishi invasion of Tamriel, which was defeated by the Emperor Riemann I, are responsible for many of the classic Imperial elements in Tamriel's culture. The Imperial Legions, the Khaviri Dragon Guard that would become the Blades, even the Fighters Guilds and institution. These are all marks that the Saishi left upon the culture we experience in-game through the Imperials of Cyrodiil. The Saishi even ruled the Empire for a time, when the Grand Vizier potentates arranged for the assassination of the Riemann Empire they supposedly served, thereby ending the line of Alessian emperors and setting up the potentates as a dynasty of their own, ruling for several generations in their stead, until, of course, the cycle came full circle, with the assassination of Severian Chorak and his heirs, which plunged Tamriel into the interregnum between the Second and Third eras, where the Elder Scrolls Online takes place. To the south of Tamriel, we have Piandonea, a continent with the rare distinction of actually having its people appear in-game. The indigenous Maorma, or Sea Elves, are closely related to the Bosma and Altma of southwest Tamriel, and as such they appear multiple times in the stories of these areas that we play through in the Elder Scrolls Online. Piandonea is apparently a marshy, swampy land that's perpetually veiled in mist. Its name actually translates to Veil of Mist, literally. Beyond that though, we don't actually know much about it. Piandonea remains very much an unexplored mystery. The honour of most mysterious continent on Nirn, though, goes to the western lands of Yakuda. Like the Needs and their Nordic descendants, the most we see of Yakudan culture comes from their Tamriel-bound descendants, the Red Guards. The Yakudans brought their Arabic-inspired lives with them as they sailed away from their homelands, to settle the vast deserts of western Tamriel in the Great Ragada, or Warrior Wave. The reason that Yakuda is so mysterious and unexplained in the lore is fairly simple though. The continent doesn't actually exist anymore after the First Era. Near the end of said era, Yakuda sunk beneath the waves of Nirn. It left only the few outlying islands to continue the tradition of the once great sword singers of the western lands. Now that covers the four major outside continents of Nirn, but before we move on to the planet's central spoke, a quick word should be said about Aldmeris. You've probably noticed it on the map, but I've chosen not to include it in the normal listings, and that's because it most likely doesn't exist. Aldmeris in the lore is described as the homeworld of the Aldmer, and through them all elves of Tamriel. Aldmeris is supposedly an isle somewhere in the oceans of Nirn, from which the Aldmer sailed to the Somerset Isle of Auredon first. Problem is though, nobody in lore or without knows where that somewhere is, and nobody in the games who set out to discover it has ever returned. It's actually strongly suggested in lore through the Elder Scrolls themselves that Aldmeris isn't actually a separate continent. Instead, it's more of a cultural history construct of the elves, a depiction of Aldmeri culture splitting off into what would eventually become the Altmer, the Bosmer, the Kaimer, and the various other elves of Tamriel that have popped up and died out over the centuries. That construct then got warped in the way that folklore tends to present Aldmeris as an entirely different place from Tamriel as a whole. Like many things in the Elder Scrolls lore, it's probably deliberately unclear. With the issue of Aldmeris taken care of though, we can finally turn our eyes to the centre of Nirn, or at least the central focus of it as we experience it: Tamriel. Tamriel is a world of wildly variable climates, cultures and creations. Some original to the content, many not. Each of its provinces have their indigenous peoples, and each of those peoples have their own unique history to tell. But, as you might have guessed, all of that is of course another tale for another time. Nirn as a whole is a bit of an oddity in the Elder Scrolls when it comes to game-focused discussion. Whilst it's clear that there's a lot of detail and lore that's gone into the other continents of Tamriel, the primary purpose of these continents is really just to provide some backstory for the various different races we encounter and play as. And given we've barely scratched the surface of Tamriel, 5 games and an MMO into the series, it's unlikely we'll be looking at journeying beyond Tamriel's shores for a very long time, if ever, really. Still though, just because we won't be playing through them, doesn't mean that we can't appreciate the effort and creativity that's gone into realising Nirn as a planet. And with that, it is time to end today's episode. As always, if you've enjoyed the video, it's very much appreciated that if you leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Next time, I won't be keeping you waiting. We will be delving right into the various lands that make up Tamriel, and setting up for further exploration of each of those provinces and peoples. Until then though, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.